Okay, so I'm just going to talk briefly about the nutritional media landscape today in the United States. And I guess not just today, but kind of over the past few decades. So if you paid attention, there's we've kind of had these rising rates of chronic disease and obesity, right? And we're looking for the culprit, right? We want to find what is causing these rising rates of disease. So what do? Well, we're gaining weight, right? Obesity's going up. So in the 90s, we blamed fat, right? So what do? We try to remove fat from our diet. We try to reduce the fat in our diet. And that makes sense intuitively, right? If you're becoming obese, you're probably eating too much fat, right? Fat, when you eat fat, it is stored as fat on your body, right? But that turned out not to work. Instead of just eating less fat, we ended up offsetting the fat with more carbohydrates, for example, and the obesity continued to rise. So we looked for a different culprit. And instead, we went in the opposite direction. And we blamed carbohydrates and praised fat, right? And with that came the Atkins diet, right? It's a low carb, high fat diet. And later on, the keto diet, right? I suppose the Atkins diet is a type of keto diet. Now, that didn't work either, right? We continue to see the rising rates of obesity and chronic disease. And maybe those diets worked for a few people here and there, but they didn't work for the masses because at the end of the day, restricting fat from your diet or restricting carbohydrates is by and large not a long-term plan, right? It's not sustainable long-term because we're surrounded by fats and carbohydrates. So what do we do next? Well, maybe it wasn't all carbs that was a problem. Maybe it was just sugar. Maybe it was added sugar. Maybe it was just high-fructose corn syrup. Maybe it was gluten. And with that came a bunch of gluten-free products or gluten-free branded food products, right? Maybe it's the grains. Maybe it's the GMOs, right? Maybe it's the seed oils, which is a common sentiment today. People are blaming seed oils and polyunsaturated fat and linoleic acid for the various problems and the inflammation that we're seeing. And bottom line, we're blamed fucking everything for the rising chronic disease and obesity. But none of these things by themselves are causing the problem. And we see that because when people remove seed oils from their diet, it doesn't fix the problem. When people remove high fructose corn syrup from their diets, it doesn't fix the problem. When people remove saturated fat from their diets, it doesn't fix the problem. The problem is not any of these things in isolation. The problem is the combination of all of them. In other words, the problem is processed food, right? So I encourage you, don't fall for these fad diets. Don't fall for these influencers who are telling you to remove this one thing from your diet and all your problems will be solved. That may be true in a small number of cases if you have an allergic reaction to gluten, for example. But by and large, that's not going to be the problem. The problem is actually the processed foods. It is the combination of fats and carbs. It's the combination of fats, carbs, and sugar and salt that make foods highly palatable. And the high palatability leads to overeating. The overeating leads to an energy surplus, obesity, and various chronic diseases, right? So we have all these fad diets today. We have keto, we have carnivore diets, we have vegan diets. Vegan diets, truth be told, are probably healthier than most of the other diets, but they kind of require a lot of knowledge about nutrition, right? You can run into some nutritional shortcomings if you're not careful. So the best diet, in truth, for us is a diverse, omnivorous diet, right? Perhaps with a plant-dominant focus, right? So if you're a carnivore, you might not believe it. You might believe that your carnivore diet is healing all your problems. And maybe it did. Maybe you cut out a bunch of processed foods and you replaced it with a bunch of lean cuts or even fatty cuts of unprocessed meat and all your health problems went away. Did those health problems go away because you removed carbohydrates or because you removed sugar? Or did they go away because you removed processed foods and you started eating less? Bottom line, if you switch to a diet, some kind of fad diet, and you lose 40 pounds, most of your health problems are probably going to go away. But is this sustainable in the long term? If it is sustainable, go for it. But if it's not, if you do find yourself yearning for pizza when you're on a carnivore diet or a keto diet, then maybe you should try to find a more sustainable way to include those carbohydrates into your diet. And this goes with all of these fat diets, right? If you're on a low saturated fat diet, Doesn't mean you don't want to eat any saturated fat, right? We do need some saturated fat for hormone production. So the bottom line here is that it's none of these single aspects of nutrition that are a problem. It's not saturated fat, it's not seed oils, it's not high fructose corn syrup, glutens, grains, GMOs. It's not all carbs, it's not all fat. The problem is processed food. And the funny thing is that the one thing we haven't blamed yet is protein. The reason for that is because protein is stripped from all the processed foods. Therefore, it can't have been a problem that we have identified within these processed foods. Protein is very satiating. It's more satiating than fat, and certainly more satiating than carbohydrates. And what that means is that if you're eating a high protein diet, you're probably not going to be able to overeat as easily. And another aspect which we have actually started to blame is fiber. Fibrous carbohydrates are one of the best ways to satiate yourself. Fibrous carbohydrates actually they create GLP-1, which is a hormone that suppresses hunger. It is the same hormone that is mimicked by drugs like semaglutide and the I don't know the brand, I forget the brand name for it, but these weight loss drugs that we're using are essentially mimicking what fiber does for us. And if we take a pill and we don't eat the fiber, then we're missing out on the benefits of that fiber. We're missing out on the benefits to our gut microbiome, right? So again, it's not fiber, it's not salt, it's not sugar, high fructose corn syrup, it's not gluten, fats, GMOs, saturated fat. None of these things are the problem. It is processed foods that are the problem. Processed foods are designed to make you want more of them. And in doing, and when those food engineers design these foods in that way, you just overeat, right? So my advice is when you go to the shop, when you go to the store, and you go shopping, walk around the outside of the store. Stick to the whole foods. Stick to the fruits, vegetables, legumes, the nuts, whole grains, lean cuts of meat preferably. But if you want to eat fatty red meat, go ahead. Don't eat the processed meat though. Don't eat the cold cuts. Those aren't good for you. So just try to stick to the outside of the store. Go down the raw ingredient or the raw ingredient aisle, right? That has the spices, the salt, the sugar, and make your meals at home if you can. And what that will do is it will reduce the number of the amount of processed food you're eating. If you look at the ingredients list on all the stuff in the middle aisles, sometimes the ingredients lists are as long as your arm. They have 100 ingredients in those foods, and it's not good for you. What that does, again, causes you to overeat because it makes those foods hyper-palatable. The reason we have all this chronic disease is because the food we're eating we're not evolved to eat it. It can work. It doesn't mean you have to cut these foods out completely, but if you don't diminish them over time, you're gonna probably catch some chronic disease. You're probably gonna become obese. You're gonna get some kind of cancer, right? The culprit is processed food. The culprit is the high palatability of processed food. So start walking and shopping along the outside of the store. Start doing that. Try to reduce instead of trying to reduce the processed foods in your diet, try to add healthy foods. And what that will do is it will push out the processed foods over time. Try to add more and more healthy foods. Next thing you know, you're going to have a thriving gut microbiome that doesn't crave all those processed carbohydrates and processed fats, right? So again, hyperpalatability is a problem. It is the cause of the obesity epidemic and largely the chronic disease epidemic. Shift away from the processed foods. Stop getting attached to these fad diets. Don't listen to the influencers that try to sell you stuff or try to tell you this is the cure-all, because it's just not going to work. The problem is the processed food. So thanks for watching.